My name is Adam, and I'm here with
Jensen, and today we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of the Roman Republic and Empire and its government.
All right, and the first thing we're going to be addressing is how did Rome come from a small kingdom in the Italian peninsula to being the center and the most powerful empire in the world. All right, first off, Rome was very good geographically. They had a lot of water near them, but not too close, so where they were still separated from attacks, and it was a perfect spot for trade and protection. Like, first off, like I said, the water provided protection from other empires because how far it was, but it also was good for trade because of the fish and everything that they can get out of it. They had mountains that protected them from invaders, but they also had resources in the mountains that they used. The mountains were good for that, and it was a good way for trade routes out throughout it. Helped Rome. Their main source of water was, like I said, it's not too far, it's not too close, so it was good. They could take trips there with multiple people, so they didn't have to be worried about invaders, and it was far away. So yeah, they were good out there. They had a lot of brilliant leaders in government. They were very strong on military and government, and their leaders, they had many famous leaders that we still know of to this day, like Caesar. We know a lot about them, like the whole Caesar family and all of them. They all really powerful rulers and leaders that helped lead Rome through many good things. Second question I'm going to be addressing, what factors ultimately led to the fall of Rome? All right, first factor is Rome lost a lot of its soldiers throughout all their battles. They had a lot of conquering that they were doing, and they were really big on that. The military fell over time because their soldiers couldn't like keep up with the amount of deaths as they had throughout the different territories they conquered. In the year 410, the Visigoths shocked everybody by conquering Rome in a crazy battle that they went out of boldness, because Rome was at that time top in the world and the biggest civilization out there, but Rome had a weak army right there, and the Visigoths took advantage of it and went and conquered them. And then after that, they went on to conquer Spain and Gaul. The Visigoths were doing some spectacular things for back then. They took advantage of Rome's small weak army in that attack, because nobody else was bold enough or brave enough to go and do that to Rome. After the conquer, they drove the Vandals from Rome into North Africa, and the Roman Empire was mostly destroyed. The Western Roman Empire was left broken up into many Germanic kingdoms, and the Eastern Roman Empire became known as the Byzantine Empire. The Romans were officially over. They went down after the conquer, and it was over for them. It's still not fully known how it all went down and how they all fell, but historians do believe mostly because of the conquer. We don't know if it was transformed into something new or it was internal forces, so it might have been like a government issue, or they were transformed into something. And religion was a big thing back then. It might have had to do something with that. And all this stuff that we just talked about in part A and B, we can read on page 331 in our textbook. Yep. And that's it for part A and B. Thank you.
As you previously heard, my name is Jensen. I'm going to be talking about what modern governments can learn from this era. So the first thing is a system of checks and balances. Today, the United States government has an executive, legislative, and judicial branches, each to check each other's powers. Whenever Congress passes a law, it has to be signed off by the head of the executive branch, which is the president, and it can be struck down by the Supreme Court as well if it violates the Constitution. And Rome, they had, for their executive branch, 2 consuls and a senate, and later on they actually had more legislative bodies to represent poor plebeians, because the patricians were the only ones allowed to be in the senate. But what this did is this prevented, at least during the Republic days, one person from becoming, an emperor or too powerful and, making all the decisions, because laws and decrees and stuff like that have to be approved by the legislature, which was the Senate, and also both consuls had to agree with each other. Another thing they can learn is an elective legislative body can help represent the interests of the people and keep the executive branch in check. As we've seen, when there's just an executive branch, like when there's an emperor in Rome, one man has all power, and we saw with some emperors that did not end well with Rome. But when there was a legislature where they could appoint or elect officials, what happened is the people's interests were represented more, especially with the bodies for the poor people, and government ran a lot smoother and had a lot more support from the people. Another thing you can do is give all the people in the country citizenship. We see in some countries where only the wealthy have citizenship, and especially in that era, but there are still some today. There are a lot of problems and instability. They have a lot of reasons to rebel and go against the government. But when everyone has citizenship, everyone can be involved in the political process. Everything runs a lot smoother. There's less reason to rebel, and citizens in new conquered areas, instead of trying to, take their land back, to often just go with the government and comply. Another thing that can happen is when the economic inequality gets too high, or there's a lot of economic instability. It can also lead to a lot of problems. We saw this in certain times in Rome, and even right now in the U.S., and there have been many times throughout history, there's a lot of inequality, instability. If the government doesn't run smoothly, citizens are unhappy. Another thing that we saw is that when the government is incompetent, like the legislature wants one thing, the executive wants another thing, there can result in a lot of government incompetence, and this allows people to support certain branches of the military or generals instead of the federal government, and it can cause a lot of issues. We saw that in Rome. People would support certain generals, and they would rebel and try and get power for themselves. So there we have it. Those are a few ways that today's governments can learn from ancient Roman Empire and Republic.
Thank you very much, Jensen.